Hey everybody, it's the Heavy Leather Horror Show, Home Edition. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Ken, and it's time for another episode of Witch Watch.
There's a white witch, there's a black witch, baby, which is a witch, which is a witch. There's a white witch, there's a black witch, baby, which is a witch, which is a witch.
Alright, every week on this segment of the show, I review a hot witch movie. I got one for you this week. Hope everybody's doing okay. I'm a little worse for wear, as many of you are, from all this quarantine. I don't know if you can see, I cracked the lenses of my glasses. So, when am I going to fix those? How am I going to, will there even be eyeglass doctors? Eyeglass stores? When this pandemic is over? I don't know. But here we are. Got a new hat though. Alright, we got a movie to talk about. Before I get there, let me explain. So last week, I think, somewhere in the last couple of weeks, I watched a double feature from Something Weird Video by a cat named Len Kurtman. Len Kurtman was a regional New York filmmaker in the early 70s, and he was terrible at his job. So the double feature I watched, it's right here. It's a Carnival of Blood and Curse of the Headless Horseman, and I will gladly give this to you if you want it. Just ask me, and you can have it. I found both of the films to be just deplorable. But what I will say about them, and films of their ilk in general, is this. So the lower budget a film has, and these had zero budget, the less money they obviously have to invest in creating their own universe. So what ends up happening is that they just use the universe that they happen to be living in. So a lot of these zero budget films end up being really interesting historical artifacts, time travelogues, if you will, of the time and place that they were created. So in that respect, I found them interesting, particularly Carnival of Blood, because the whole thing was shot on the boardwalk of Coney Island in 1971 or 1972. So that was really interesting. The other one, Curse of the Headless Horseman, took place at some abandoned sort of Wild West amusement park kind of place, wherever they shot that. Wasn't as interesting, but also, again, as historical artifacts, they can be really interesting. But as films, just zero entertainment value. Then I heard that this guy made a third film. Now, seems masochistic. You hated the other two. Why would you watch this one? Because I also heard that it was a hot witch movie, and that's what I review here on the show. So here we are with 1971's Death by Invitation. Death by Invitation was not directed, thankfully, by Len. It was directed by his friend, Ken Friedman. Ken Friedman, he only directed one other film later on in the late 80s, but he was primarily known as a screenwriter, and he actually did pretty well as a screenwriter. He wrote Cadillac Man starring Robin Williams, Johnny Handsome starring Mickey Rourke back when he would be the guy in a film called Johnny Handsome, and perhaps most notably 1994's Bad Girls, the all-female cowgirl movie starring Drew Barrymore, Annie MacDowell, and Madeline Stowe, which was a staple for a while there, basic cable. So he did okay. The film Death by Invitation starred Shelby Leverington, who as the hot witch, who also had a pretty good career doing really small bit parts in television shows throughout, all the way up until she retired in the late 2000s. But little Lou Grant hair, little Tales from the Crypt hair. She did pretty good for herself. Let's talk about it. In the first scene, a witch, played by Shelby, is being dragged through the streets of a village, reading into it. It's supposed to be a Dutch village, I guess, a medieval Dutch village. I don't know why Dutch, but that's what it's supposed to be. Perhaps because they shot it on some Dutch village reenactment place. I don't know, but it's got that vibe. The vibe of the opening scene reminded me instantly of the Victorian era films of the notorious filmmaker Andy Milligan. And what's interesting is that Andy Milligan, this film was shot in Staten Island. He also shot all of his films in Staten Island, also at the same time, also with no budget. So it shared an aesthetic for sure. In fact, probably shared extras, I would imagine. So she gets dragged through the village and into a courthouse. And one of the sort of weird things about this scene too is that some of the actors are wearing some kind of like ghoulish Kiss makeup for some reason. I kind of thought maybe that would be explained later on, but it never was. Anyway, she gets accused of something. Here, watch.
I know of her evil, and I know of her relations with the devil. I know because I saw her naked, writhing, screaming.
Yeah, basically all it takes. Concerning with Satan being naked. And so we don't find out what happens to her, but we assume it's bad. So here we are in modern times now. Modern times being 1971 when it was shot. And we're at some sort of family dinner. And if you look around the room, you wouldn't, but if you look around the room, you'll notice that the people around the dinner table are some of the same villagers from the last scene. And in walks the witch. Only now, her name is Lise, and she's assumably a friend of the family. She sits down. She starts talking about flirting with the taxi driver on the way over, much to the chagrin of Peter, head of the family, who's really annoyed with her, who also happened to be the guy accusing her of witchcraft in the last scene. Interesting. Where are we? How did we get here? Who are these people now? I don't know. That guy, Peter, was played by Aaron Phillips. It was his only role. And he did a great job at it, I think, because he was just playing himself. I believe Aaron Phillips was probably just an angry, perpetually angry, middle-aged family patriarch and local businessman in real life. And so he was just playing himself in the film. And, he did a good job at it. Next scene, where you're at Lisa's place. She's got heavy occult vibes going on. There's candles everywhere. She's got satanic statues. Roger, who was at dinner, presumably Peter's son, he shows up. She tells a really long, rambling story about some southern tribes. I'm assuming Native American tribes. I don't know why, since we were supposed to be in a Dutch village. And she tells the story about these tribes who were, the females were the hunters and the men oiled them up. Swear, that's what the whole thing is about. And she's smoking a cigarette the whole time, and it takes the entire length of the cigarette to tell this story. And then she kills Roger. I can't really tell how that happened. Here you can see it. What is that? Is she hugging him to death? Who knows? But blood is trickling down, and so we know that he is finished. Okay, so there's a guy, Jake. He's at the dinner too. He's not part of the family, but he's at the dinner. He is some sort of business associate of Peter. So there's a scene where he goes to visit Peter at work, and he's walking down the hallway. He walks down the hallway for 3 minutes, and it's 3 minutes, 3-minute hallway sequence. And then when he has his meeting with Peter, the music on the soundtrack is so loud that the characters can't hear each other.
Peter, how did Lisa and Naomi meet? How did Lisa and Naomi meet?
At an auction. Why?
Just curious.
What? I'm just curious.
It's that whole scene apparently is it's comedy in the middle of a completely non-comedic film. Go figure. Roger is still missing. The family has dinner together. They're all fighting. There are many scenes in this film where the family is having dinner together, and they're all tense. What'll happen is Peter will blow up at them, and then everybody be quiet, and then you just hear, like, the clicking of the forks and whatnot. It reminded me very much of tense family dinners when I was a kid in the 70s. So I didn't like that. Nobody likes that. If anything makes this a horror film, it's all the shots of tense family dinners. So anyway, Sarah, who's the teenage daughter, the phone rings. She assumes that it's her boyfriend, so she runs upstairs to get it, much to the chagrin of Peter. But when she gets up there, turns out it was just Lise luring her up there. Lise decapitates her in the lamest way possible. Later on, she lures or is lured, hard to say. Something happens with her and Jake where she ends up back at her apartment. Jake is very sexually aggressive and rapey in this whole sequence, which I don't know if he was that guy before. He was kind of the hero before. Now he's very rapey. He ends up having sex with her. Hard to say whether it was forced or not. But anyway, afterwards, basking in the glow, he wanders around her apartment, finds a big bag of blood hanging from a door, something in it. Never really clear what that is. I'm assuming it's some of Roger's body parts. Freaked out, and then Peter bursts through the door, and then there's an axe, and then there's a fight, and then there's a flashback to her execution when it turns out that Peter was the executioner, chopping her head off, and she put a curse on him and all of his descendants for 300 years. And if you do the math, it's 300 years later. And of course, Peter is the descendant of the executioner, which we kind of had that figured out a long time ago. And I have to say, as far as a climactic action sequence, this one just does not cut the mustard. Alright, so anyway, movie-wise, as motion pictures go, this one's pretty bad. I mean, there's no... all the action is incredibly clumsy. There's no gore. There's no nudity. A lot of the acting, aside from Peter and Lise, is pretty wonky. Not that good. But, again, and I guess this is sort of Len's specialty, it has heavy, real people vibes. Enough so that it's kind of hypnotic. And in a way that the other two films that he made aren't. The other two films I never want to see again. This one, I just said to myself, sure, I'll watch this again. I don't know why, but there was something about it that kind of bewitched me a little bit. As far as the hot witch goes, super hot. What kind of hot? She's basically a sort of earth tone corduroy witch. There's one scene when she's at a funeral where she has a purple velvet cowl. But that's not really her vibe. Her vibe is mostly smoking cigarettes and wearing brown. Listen, I'll watch any hot witch movie, and I've certainly proved that by watching Death by Invitation. Is it slow? Yes, it's slow. But does it have a hot witch? Yes, it has a hot witch. It's on Tubi. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it for free. And Vinegar Syndrome also released it as a double feature with the Dungeons of Barrow, which you can buy for, I think, for $10 or $11 right now if you really want to. I'm sort of thinking about it. That's how hypnotized I was by this weird movie. That's this week's Witch Watch, Death by Invitation. We'll see you next time. And until then, stay healthy. Hail Satan. And whatever you do, stay 6 feet away from me. Bye, guys.